Hey guys, Tom here. So in this video, I'm going to go over the most simplest type of hinge and the most simple tool that I use to install them. And that is this guy right here. This is a CA hinge, also known as an easy hinge because it's so easy to use. And really, it doesn't get much simpler. An X-Acto knife is really all you absolutely need to install these, but I'll demonstrate the technique that I use. It's not much of a technique. It's basically just jamming the knife into your trailing and leading edges, creating a slot, and sticking the hinge in there and gluing it. I mean, that's pretty much all there is to it, but I'll go ahead and show you a couple of things for starters. Here's my control surface. It's a leftover piece from the Duelist build. I happen to have a few extra slots available, so I thought I'd demonstrate on this. But as you can see, that I've already marked the center line of the trailing edge of this is the horizontal stab, but I've also marked a center line on the actual control surface on the leading edge. So lots of different ways you can mark a center line. You can take your marking utensil, grab it between your two fingers and line it up down the center line and draw it right down the center. That's one way you can do it. If you are the proud owner of the Dubro hinge slotting kit, it comes with a cool little marking guide. You can use that to sort of stick that on there and it centers itself, and then you can sort of take your Xacto knife, put it in the slot, create a little slot, do that a few times down, put a straight edge on that and connect the dots. You can also do it that way. But however you do it, make sure you get a good reference so that you know where the center of that is. So when you get the two hinged together, they are hinged in alignment and not out of alignment. So basically, I mean, it's super, super simple. I'm going to put my old man glasses on here because I can't see without them. And then it's just a simple matter of taking your Xacto knife, preferably a sharp one, and being very, very, very careful not to cut yourself. You just basically score a line right down your center line where that hinge is going to go. Now, I will say that what I've done here is, I don't know if you can pick it up on the camera, but I've put a little line or a dot where I want the center of my hinge to be. With the easy hinges or the CA hinges, they're not quite as critical as far as being in alignment, especially with the other hinges on the control surface. But I like to make sure that the lines on my trailing edge of the stab, in this case, line up with whatever marks I make so that all my hinges are in exactly the same location on both pieces. That's a good practice to get in because later on, if you decide to start using pinned style hinges, you'll already be in the habit of having them in alignment front to rear between your stab, in this case, and the control surface. So anyway, continuing on, you're basically just gonna trying to separate the fibers with the knife, just running it down here, do it a few times, a little bit deeper each time, trying to concentrate on keeping that knife perpendicular to the surface, right? So if I give you a head-on shot here, you can kind of see that knife is nearly perpendicular. I've done almost a great job. It may not be perfect, but I'll give you another shot here. You can see that it's pretty much perpendicular. You don't want to put this thing in at an angle, although with a CA hinge, it's not as big a deal. Again, if you get into doing pinned hinges later on, that becomes more and more critical. So what we're doing here is we're just taking our time, slowly making this pocket deeper and deeper so that we can slide the hinge in there. And I don't know if you saw it earlier, but you can, if you look here, right here, this piece here, I've added backers to where all of my hinges are going, okay? And I did that because I like to use those Robart pinpoint hinges, but it's good practice to get in if your structure doesn't have that material sort of built into the trailing edge. Then you can see here, in the case of this stab, we're only dealing with 3/8 of an inch here. That's only 3/8 of an inch for the glue to attach your hinge to the control surface. So adding that little backer block everywhere you're going to put a hinge just gives it that much more surface to glue to and just makes it that much more of a solid connection and less prone to the hinge pulling out of that stab in this case, which would make for a bad day. So, like I said, we're just making that slot deeper and deeper with each pass. And I'm trying not to make the slot a lot bigger than I need it to be, but it's okay if it's a little bit wider than it really needs to be. And that becomes more important the more complex style hinge you go to. You can see there, that's about how deep I've gone so far. And I'm going to go ahead and give that a trial fit. And you can see with this hinge right here, there's a line. I went ahead and drew a line down the center of this hinge so I know how far to stick it in the slot. So, we'll put it in there, and if it makes it all the way to my center line, it does. Kind of see right there. That's really all there is to this. And then I'll do the same thing on my actual control surface. Now you see what I'm going to do right here is I'm going to line that up, and you can see, hopefully we can zoom in and see this. I'm going to go ahead and make a couple of reference lines here. Now I know how wide that slot needs to be. All I've done is I've marked the edge of the hinge location on my actual control surface. And then same process, I'm going to take my sharp X-Acto knife and very, very carefully, without cutting myself, just go right down that center line that I drew while trying to keep the knife perpendicular to the hinge line. Now something I want to note, you'll notice that I'm not really removing any material. Like there's no material coming out of this slot. And we mentioned this in our podcast episode when we talked about hinges, how the easy hinges or the CA type hinges or even the flat nylon hinges, when we're cutting the slots for these, we're not actually removing material. We're just separating the fibers, it's not really even a pocket, creating a void so that the hinge can slip in between those fibers. And I'm not a huge fan of that. I like to remove material because in the case of an easy hinge or a CA hinge, they're so thin, probably doesn't really matter, because when you stick that hinge in the slot, now you've taken up that area between the two fibers and you've actually added thickness. It's a really, really small amount in this case, but when you get into some of the thicker pinned style hinges, that matters. And then when you go to cover it, if you haven't already, you'll notice after you hinge it and you look down the line, you'll see these bumps everywhere a hinge is located because you didn't remove any material. You're just wedging that hinge in those fibers, creating, spreading those fibers apart, making those bumps. I'm not a big fan of that. I like nice smooth finishes. So normally CA hinges, I don't worry too much about it, but when we get into the other style of hinges, you'll see that I actually remove material with some of these other tools. You can use an Xacto knife to do any flat style hinge. If you're really comfortable with it, you can, over time with practice, you can actually make it so that you can actually remove slivers of material, which is, in my opinion, the best way to go about it, creating an actual pocket. But either way, so I've got my slot cut here. Same procedure, just plunge my knife in there, tried to keep it perpendicular, and then I'm going to go ahead and trial fit them here. Oh, put my glasses back on. There we go. And voila, there we go. Show you that right there. And you can see we flex it. You can kind of see, I'll pull it away a little bit so you can see that hinge in there. There you go. See the hinge? And then close up the gap, give it a flex. And now that's pretty much ready for gluing. Now I noticed when I slid that in there, you can still see my center line of my hinge there. You can barely make it out there. The hinge is perfectly centered in the slot. So that means I have as much hinge in the stab as I do in the control surface in this case. Now, it's totally possible that if I slid that in there, it might have wanted to push the hinge farther in. And one way you can avoid that is after you draw your center line on your hinge, you just take a T-pin or some kind of a pin that maybe you use when you build, stick it right on that center line, slide the hinge in until the pin hits, take the other surface, slide the surface on, and then pull that pin out. And now you know that the hinge is centered in the slot. And then all that's left to do now, once we've got our hinge in there and we like that, is what I like to do is I like to give it a little flex either direction, try to minimize any hinge gaps, make sure I've got the throw I need, and then it's a couple of drops of CA, which I happen to have right here, a couple of drops of CA on either side of the hinge. And in this particular case, I just got to say, sometimes less is more. Most instruction manuals for ARFs that you get that come with these hinges, they say 3 to 4 drops of CA. That's plenty, really, because you're going to put some on this side, and then we're going to flip it over and we're going to put some on that side. 3 or 4 drops is plenty because, as you know, thin CA is very thin, as the name implies, and it's like water. And if you get too much in there, what happens is it runs down your hinge line, and then, heaven forbid, it runs off the hinge line and then across your covering. And the stuff, I mean, we've talked about it before, CA remover will take it off, but it's a lot of work and it's really unnecessary. Less is more. 3 to 4 drops is all you need. So I'll just show you how I do that. Just give it a little flex here. Turn this up. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4, and you'll see it kind of wick in there. And then I'll flip it over, give it another little flex this direction, count the drops. 1, 2, 3, 4. And because it's thin CA and nearly instant, I'll let that sit for a few seconds, and then I'll come back and give it a flex, and there we go. One complete hinged control surface ready to go. Won't pull out. So there you go. Hope you've enjoyed this little how-to. Quick and simple. The Xacto knife and the easy hinge. That's how I install them. See you next time.